Hello. So I will present the strategy of French and European infrastructure, whose objectives are to, very simply, to adapt plant to climate change. Very simple topic. So I will present here the main rationale and strategy, and two co-authors, Cyril Pommier and Pascal Neveu, during this week will present more how we deal with things. I will begin with a major problem that is essential for dealing with the data. We say we deal with climate change, but when we go into detail, then we see that plants are acclimating all the time. So this poor plant can be 10 degrees in the morning, 30-something in the afternoon, and can be in very good shape in the morning and stressed in the afternoon. So we have a tension that is essential for data management, a tension, because we claim we can link mechanism with yield, which once I have said that can seem like a stupid bet, because mechanism can be defined only at minute, so you cannot define stomatal conductance, metabolism over long times, whereas yield is months. So for this reason, we need to have a diversity of platforms. We cannot do everything at the same scale. So there have been a lot of stupid papers in the literature claiming that it's better to be in the field because it's in the field, better to have to be in a control condition because this is technology, etc. This is probably not very useful. If we agree that there is this tension, then we need to characterize the same plants at different levels. And because we want to characterize these same plants at different levels, then we have a trouble for connecting all these datasets. So to the very sad interpretation of our funders, who really wanted us to have in France to have one big factory for phenotyping, we said no, we cannot do that. We are obliged to have something like high precision platform, high throughput control platform, field, network of fields, etc. And we actually need all these scales and connect them, and I will be back to this question of connecting, just because really we cannot deal with the things at one single scale. So let's see in some minutes what does it mean in different scale and what is the consequence for our data. So we can have high precision platforms at minutes. This is good for dealing with the hydraulics, metabolism, etc. Again, there is no possibility that we deal with hydraulics or metabolism over weeks. This is just nonsense. So we need these platforms to some extent. And so typically here we have, for instance, one plant growing. So you can record this growth rate every minute or so. And each of these lines is one plant one day. And then you can do some relationship between environmental conditions and leaf elongation rate. One point that will be important for the rest of the discussion. We have here points. So this is air dryness. So the air is dry here and wet here. This is growth. And we have the same relationship between field, chamber, greenhouse. So this is important because in many cases it's claimed that you can do nothing between field, etc. And platform. Yes, we can, but provided that we have the proper characterization and also the proper ontologies for what to put here. Right, so, and then if we do that, we can have a genetic analysis of all of that, etc. Unfortunately, these platforms that are good for doing hydraulics physiology, basically, are not adapted for having broader scale. So if you want to study in a plant or a canopy, things like light interception, water transfer, whole plant signaling, you need something else. So that's the reason why there are other types of platforms in which we can have imaging, for instance, here of a root system, together with the microenvironment of the plant, and try to make a story out of that. We have the same here in Montpellier for plant architecture, in which we can have 3D plants. So plants are moving, we can take a lot of images and reconstruct the 3D plants and put them virtually in a greenhouse, or even in a field. So again, that's another way with the modeling to connect a greenhouse with a field. You take your virtual plant, you put them in the field, and you arrange them as you like, and then you can connect everything. So data. So here we have the major problem in this type of a platform of connecting a lot of data that are images, 3D plants that are not exactly the images, the environment, plus all the small detail that makes life nice, so that this plant looks horrible, or this plant has fallen, etc. Right. So from that, again, with model, and modeling is essential. When we talk in your community of model, often it's the models of data representation. You have also the functional models to, for instance, characterize and simulate the amount of light that the plant is collecting every day. And you can see here that this red plant collects more than this plant, etc. So we can calculate that. And again, do a genetic dissection and go to the field to see how things are with models that play the one with the others. Okay. So we have seen that we can go from the platform to the field, but we believe our model, but only to some extent. So we need also to have things in the field, and you have seen things like vectors that can image the plant and typically have 3D images of architecture, life interception, etc. So I want to insist on one thing here that deals with the former presenter talked about the difficulty of having different communities communicating. Every single term that are used here, leaf area, light interception, is not understood exactly in the same way by the guys who work here and by the guys who work in this type of things. It's about the same thing, but hell is in detail, so often the units are not exactly the same. Even the meaning, if you talk of plant height, it's straightforward, but plant height in the field, it's, well, that's the height of the canopy. Plant height in a platform is the highest point. It's not the same. So it is a difficulty, and that we have to acknowledge as a difficulty, not only to say, well, we just have to meet and things will be better. Okay, so we have things like drones. Again, the same word means something slightly different if you have drones. And finally, you can go to multi-site experiments. And here, I just want to insist on the fact that this makes data that are slightly messy, usually, when you do genetic analysis of yield in many sites. So you can do that with association genetics, but more often than not, you have as many. So this is the genome, and whenever you have a peak, this means that there is a gene here that controls yield. But when you go from one field to another, it's a mess usually. So you have thousands of peaks, and I just want to show that. So if you organize all your data sets in environmental scenarios based on temperature, light, etc., then things begin to be more simpler. So for instance, this peak here that is apparently horrible because it appears somewhere, it doesn't appear elsewhere, etc., it turns out that it's very positive, plus 0.4 ton, which is a lot. If you are in severe water deficit and cool, but it can turn out to be negative in others. So I say that just to insist on the fact that the environmental data are not just another metadata that is used, but it is part of the phenomic information, because if you don't have a proper environmental characterization, which, by the way, is very cheap, you cannot really understand your data sets. So we can even go to yield prediction with models by using parameters used in defined in the platform, environmental data in each field, and then try to simulate yield in whole Europe, if you like. It works more or less. We can predict about half of the genetic variability across sites, but of course with a high genotype by environment interaction. So we have to live with a diversity of platform that I've presented them rapidly. So by combining scales, which means having ontologies, consistent environmental characterization, so I cannot insist more on that, and transcale modeling. So we need to combine and analyze datasets in field and control condition. It's not that we want to analyze them together. We need common ontologies, common information system at all these scales. So what does it mean? So first, Pascal Neveu is here, Cyril Pommier is here, Nadine Hilgert is here. So we have invested a lot in a project that was infrastructure on something on infrastructure, on data infrastructure. So first, what do we want? We want environmental conditions. I've explained you why. Environmental conditions are part really of the game in phenotyping. So we want them to be consistent between field and control conditions, so sensors, unit, names. Usually it's relatively easy. Spatial variability is absolutely key. So everybody is convinced of that usually in the field, and it becomes more or less an accepted technique to have H-plot with GPS. Has to be exactly the same in a greenhouse, and many of us don't have a right idea of what a greenhouse is. So this is transmission. So here you have not very much of light transmitted. This is a greenhouse, and this is high transmission. And you can see that in the same greenhouse of a day, it's not it's actually during a week. So some places have twice the amount of light than another place that is very close. So keep track of XY positions is key. And it's good because it's something that can be common in information system for both conditions. Time courses, we need to have something we debate we have with MyAP sometimes. We need to have the time courses of variables, probably not fancy indices, a number of hours with more than 20 degrees, etc., because every scientist will produce them, but what we need is to keep the time course of the variables, plus, of course, the position of the sensors. So keep track of sensor position, calibration, plant plot position, time, etc., with the URIs. Second thing, object of events. I will take off traits at the end. We need an effort to name the objects in a consistent way, in emphasis, but elsewhere. So in many cases, we don't name the object in the same way, a sensor, a carrier, etc. It's important, and this is relatively easy because there is no ideology here. So it's just an effort. So we have this ontology that is published now, so it can be used. Of course, semantic web. If we have decent names of objects, we can have the relationship between objects. So which plant in which experiment, etc., and with the semantic web to track everything, and track events that can cause the difficulty for interpretation. So again, keep track. This is the main thing with your eyes. These are relatively simple. Now for the traits, as I said, this is really the tricky part. Usually when we talk of ontology, we straight go to the traits. It's perhaps not the first thing to be done. I said environment and events is probably easier to do. Oops. It's not straightforward. So I said every single term has a slightly different meaning in different platform, in different people, etc. And probably the solution is not to have big meetings on deciding what is the better solution, because I have witnessed many of these meetings, and usually after 1 week we are exactly at the same point as we were at the beginning. So it's probably working in a smart way to generate trans-scale ontologies with a context, with a project, etc. So meaning, okay, in this project, the meaning in that, so at least perhaps automatically with semantic web, we can track that. But it's not a question of imposing or even deciding. And of course, map on crop ontologies and others. But this is not all the solution. The mapping is essential. It's great, we do it, but it will not solve all the solution just because we don't name the same word doesn't mean exactly the same thing in different places. And that's it.